Iļja ir uzņēmuma Gedžer dibinātājs no Lietuvas. Iļja ir iekļauts telekomunikāciju nozars top 40 ietekmīgāko pasaules cilvēku sarakstā. Un nevelti, jo viņa radītā mobilo lietotņu tirzniecības platforma mēnesī sasniedz vairāk nekā 1 miljonu unikālo lietotāju, kas kopumā ielādē 100 miljonu lietotāju programmu. Iļja, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't speak Latvian, so I did not understand any of the introduction, but I hope it was something nice. So what I wanted to talk today a little bit is about education and entrepreneurship. Well, it's not a secret that our Baltic countries have declared that a top priority for the countries is building the knowledge economy and focusing on the high value-added areas, and high-tech, IT, internet, fast internet, broadband, and those kind of things is in everyday vocabulary of any decent politician today. And on the other hand, a lot of being talked here about how competitive we are in terms of pricing, how cheap our coders are. I heard even today in this conference that we should maybe position ourselves as a cheap development place because it's cheaper to produce things here. And having experience in one of the best places in the world for IT technology, the Silicon Valley, I would like to share some perspective about how things maybe seem slightly different and what are the areas for us to improve, because apparently we have a ton of advantage even over Silicon Valley. I will highlight some of the points, but there is a lot of areas where we have to change a little bit. And before I go into the formal presentation, I just wanted to share a little story how I first got into Silicon Valley. So that was like maybe 5-6 years ago, and a taxi driver picked me up at the airport, and he was driving me to the city maybe for 30 minutes or so. And the first question for him was like, hey, what are you doing? What do you do? I say, well, I'm internet business and doing, IT projects, etc. So he spent like 10 minutes asking me anything and everything about the internet, how to build a web page, how to promote that, what Google search is, etc., because he was thinking of putting together a website for his taxi. Like a taxi driver, a website for his taxi, why not? He would just, accept email orders and he would get more business. The last 15 minutes of the drive, he asked me anything and everything I was going to do in Silicon Valley. So he put together a schedule and saying, hey, Iļja, like at minute 15, he was talking to me, hey, Iļja. so he put together a list of at least 10 of my visits that I already knew the timing for. So I was going to see a conference, I had a meeting in downtown Palo Alto, etc. So he put together a list and said, hey, Iļja, I will meet you at the hotel, I will wait you there. Basically, I will do anything, but please just book those times for me, and I will take care of you. So when I left the taxi, after 30 minutes, I realized two things. One is the monetary value he was able to squeeze of me was actually around $300. As opposed to $20 that the trip from airport to city costed. And B, he actually used a pretty expensive advice on the internet and web, etc., that I would charge probably, I don't know, like 4 0 digits anybody else, even for 15 minutes conversations. So I was surprised, I was impressed. And that was just, an average taxi driver. And just to give a comparison, yesterday I was driving from airport to my city in Vilnius, in Lithuania, and the taxi driver told 0 words at all, period, 0. So he got like €5 from me, and that's it. So I think that highlights the difference in the culture. Entrepreneurship is much more about just knowing things. It's about being able to apply them in practice, in reality. It's not enough to have a high school diploma, etc., as many of you know, a lot of Latvians and Lithuanians and Estonians have, unless you apply that knowledge to something practical, unless you translate that into business, there is zero value to that. So that's why, sometimes I know about Latvia, but Lithuania is called the nation which has the highest penetration of PhD taxi drivers in the country. That's the reality. I've seen taxi drivers with PhD unable to squeeze more than €5 from one visit. Again, relative to somebody who probably had a school degree only in Silicon Valley, at least he looked like, but was able to squeeze $300 of me. So I think that highlights the difference. But To support my statement that education, I mean, this is not a secret at all. I mean, we are all talking about education, high tech and technology, and high value, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the research behind my back, simply, confirming the fact that education degree typically correlates with the salary range, or in other words, with economic value that a given person can bring to society, earn for himself, et cetera. The funny caveat here is that you will see that the doctoral degree, also a PhD, earns less with a master's degree. So interesting highlights, maybe explains a little bit why taxi drivers in Lithuania typically would have a PhD degree. But what I really wanted to talk about is how you translate that knowledge into something meaningful. And I wanted to share, well, don't please accuse me of maybe being a little bit too pro-American. I specifically picked Silicon Valley and the Stanford model and that kind of environment for two reasons. One is I did have a chance to see from inside what it is, how it's going on in the last 5 years. Unfortunately, I was not in Japan or somewhere else, so I cannot compare those territories. And B, honestly, I think that all of us simply clearly see that Silicon Valley is becoming the place for technology innovation companies like Facebook, Google, etc. So there is something about them that we probably need to first understand and then learn. So I just picked up Stanford University just as an example, because in America, this university is most well known for entrepreneurship. And behind me are a couple of, to me, shocking, striking facts. So just in 4 years, just Stanford University students raised $4.1 billion in technology funding. So they come out with ideas, they build companies, they raise money, and private capital invests in that. I mean, those of you who have not tried to raise capital, I mean, many of you are in business, I know, probably it would be safe to assume that capitalists do not like putting capital into something dumb. So it does take effort, ingenuity, definitely great ideas, dedication, etc., to get that kind of money. And that's over $1 billion every single year. And given that Stanford University is only 18,000 students, I did some quick math, and it struck to me that every single student on every year is able to attract average of $60,000 in funding just to fund his ideas. So in the years from the foundation of the university in 1930, 40,000 companies have been founded just by Stanford University students. And that created 5.4 million jobs that today, at this time, this year, account for, well, whopping number, $2.7 trillion in annual revenue. Think of it, $2.7 trillion. Just to give you a perspective, that's exactly 100 times the Latvian domestic product combined together. So just Stanford University is able to produce enough students to build 100 times Latvian economies. I don't know about you, but I do find those numbers just overwhelm me strongly. And again, having seen that from inside, having seen those taxi drivers, having touched that kind of culture and experience, definitely there's something there. And it's not just Stanford. Again, you could say, hey, Stanford is unique, it's very different than the rest of America, et cetera, et cetera. I took in behind me the chart about the top 6 US universities. Yes, Stanford is leading, but all of them are very active, very innovative. There is a lot of ideas coming, a lot of companies, a lot of startups, a lot of funding. And here is a chart which I took from the European Commission sources. And it displays the relative investment into technology to countries' GDP. And, well, Latvia, Lithuania are at the bottom a little bit. Estonia, which is our neighbor, is investing 4 times more on average than we do. So no surprise, Estonia is everywhere you go, very often considered to be an absolute leader in Baltic countries in terms of technology funding, penetration startups, and those kind of stuff. But again, probably what this chart illustrates, this is more a pan-European problem as opposed to just Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, because you definitely see countries like United Kingdom, Israel, not being able to compete with just top 6 US universities. Again, interesting fact that top 6 US universities relative to GDP invest more into technology. I mean, their students are able to attract more investments into technology than most European countries. So again, it does illustrate that success just doesn't appear from nowhere. I mean, you have to create the right environment, you have to invest. And only after you're able to invest, only then you're able to build something that works. This is another way to look at the technology. You know, who's really who in this world? And one of the more often ways by economists to measure the pace at which different countries are achieving different, say, technology wins is the IPOs. Because as you know, IPO, initial public offering, is the kind of a maturity barrier for any company, like any company growing into something bigger at some point of time becomes public. So very often this used to measure you know, how many new tech, or not tech, just new businesses are being built in the countries. And IPO market is very often used for that. So this is Europe relative to US. And again, the striking finding is that if measured by both deals and the number of money invested into technology, Europe is 17% of the total of the world, cumulatively, like all European countries combined. US is 40, so that's twice as the whole of Europe. And as you know, as economists would say, European market in terms of the domestic product, in terms of the propensity to spend, every economic parameter is actually equal to the whole of US. So again, relative to number of population, et cetera, US is still twice as successful. But what is really not cool for Europe is that countries like Asia or Brazil are really faster than us. So unfortunately, although we are talking that we are tech companies, we want to build next generation knowledge economy, etc. Unfortunately, you know, if you like take a look at the top tech companies like Facebook, Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, Apple, etc. Unfortunately, for us Europeans, here all of them are US-based Silicon Valley companies. So, so then I try to think, you know, hey, you know, having touched or experienced, you know, those differences from inside, what are the top areas that might need improvement or at least closer look at? And here are the top 7 that I was able to identify, and I think they are all very important. We'll not spend too much time analyzing each of them, just highlight. So first of all is definitely mentality in European entrepreneurship culture. Again, just as the average taxi driver in Silicon Valley, all his day, you know, squeezes everything he can do from every single customer, thinks of the tech, you know, how would Facebook or Google would help him to bring taxi. That's deep in the blood. Again, I don't know about Latvia, but in Lithuania, when you talk to students, business students, and this is like a real fact. A couple months ago, I was giving a keynote to one of the university's business students, a second year class. And, you know, during the discussion, I realized, you know, hey, there's some kind of disconnection between what I talk and you know, how the audience reacts. So just to double check, I say, hey, you know, we're talking about investments. How many of you, of business students, second year class, know the difference between credit that the bank would issue and investment? 400 people, 5 hands. Second class business school, business university. So, so there is an issue there. Again, I don't think this is because the Lithuanians or Latvians or Estonians are stupid or lazy or anything else. Well, if, again, all respect to us, we only have 20 years of market economy, so although we're great at traditional knowledge areas like medicine or physics or mathematics or informatics, anything touching, you know, business, market economy, marketing, sales, etc. is relatively new. So there is nowhere to get that experience from, right? You know, there are no companies that have people with 20 years of experience. There are no teachers that could build actually all those programs for universities, etc. So I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just, you know, highlighting that yes, there is a pretty big difference between, again, average knowledge there and average knowledge here. And unless we learn those areas, so what that we have a high university diploma and invented some kind of cool thing, you know, if we cannot really turn it into business. So that needs to have a look. There is no established ecosystem. Again, probably many of you have heard a ton of initiatives by governments, by European Commission, how to accelerate the you know, startup movements and funding, and you know, venture capital funds are being built and managed by European government agencies, etc., etc. Still, this is not working as good as it could be. Again, there are issues, I will maybe touch them a little bit later, but you know, my personal opinion, I do not believe into budgetary measures, I think that the private money, private venture capital is the way to go, because since the kolkhoz days, we know how the public money inefficiently being managed, etc. And again, after having seen a lot of those initiatives, I see that definitely the efficiency is not there yet, so that ecosystem is not working properly yet. Again, if you look deeper into universities, how come? Again, this is my own experience. I studied 6 years banking and finances in one of the Lithuanian University of Economics. I never ever heard the word venture capital, not a single time. Although the role for venture capital, for the technology, for innovation is much more important than even banks. So there is a huge difference between theory and practice. And then again, if you walk into universities, you realize that there is a lot of theoretical knowledge, and there is very little touch with reality. And here I just have to share one story. Last year, I was invited to US Berkeley University, which is also in Silicon Valley, pretty famous. And I was asked to talk a little bit about the mobile applications, mobile economy, the new technology, etc. And I was prepared to give a very broad talk as to unprepared audience. So just to start with the basics, explain, what mobile is, what the trends are, etc. So I walk into this auditory and then stopped second minute. I start talking and I'm stopped, full stop. And the kids say, students, they go hey, stop, we get all of that. That's not of interest. So last week, the Google Motorola deal happened. So can you please elaborate a little bit what that means? And I'm shocked. It was last week. And this is what we discussed today in the class. What the consequences are. Did Google pay money for patents or for market opportunity or for brand? And they are discussing that with the teacher, and they are inviting the people who they think have some inside knowledge into the classes and say, hey, last week that happened, please comment what is going on, and we want to know because we learn real time based on what is happening in the industry. And that's, probably you would agree, that's very different from what you typically find in, say, our universities, that at least in my time taught 18th century Keynes versus Adams economical theory, etc. Excuse me, but we are 150 years old. So there is a big disruptance here, and there is a big gap between practice and theory. As a result, many of the students simply cannot find a job after finishing university because they are detached from reality. Again, unlike some examples in America. And, well, this is, again, something that I think is probably outside this crowd expertise, is, how Europe deals with labor regulations, liberal versus regulated, etc., etc. I'm just, pointing out that some tough labor regulations are making it more difficult to invest, and that's it. Again, we are Europeans to decide what to value more, like social security or innovation, because they cannot really go together. If you're a venture capital and if you want to limit your exposure, say, by $1 million or $2 million, with some kind of startup, and you by definition have no clue whether it's going to work or not, by definition, innovation is trial and error. At that point, you cannot take obligation of the social consequences, etc., of hiring and firing and dealing with this stuff. So again, as a rule of thumb, again, just sharing this data, American VCs prefer not to invest in Europe, simply because it makes hiring, firing, experimentation, etc., much more difficult than in America. Again, France is, being most talked about, and in France, I don't know if you really have met those kind of things, but it's very difficult to, say, fire a person, let the person go, and they use what they call putting somebody in the closet. That means at some point of time, if you realize that the employee doesn't add value, does not know what he's doing, etc., etc., you cannot really fire him because that's expensive. Sometimes you pay hundreds of thousands of euro for firing a person. It's much cheaper just to let him alone. Period. So he walks into the office, does whatever he can. There is zero management overhead spend, etc. So there's even a term that Americans invented for specifically that kind of labor things in Europe. So those regulations make it more difficult to experiment specifically. And I personally don't think that you can apply same rules to, say, a factory with 10,000 employees and then a small startup, that would like to work overtime. Again, I don't know about Latvia, but in Lithuania, it is illegal to work more than 40 hours a week, period. Like as an employee, I cannot ask my guys So I specifically tell them not to work, because if they do and somebody finds out, I'm penalized as an employer. So those kind of things do make it difficult. A couple of years ago in the World Economic Forum, I heard a brilliant joke about one Indian guy, and he said, you know what, the French people will never be able to work in India. So there's like zero touch point, because in France, it is illegal to work more than 35 hours a week. In India, it is illegal to work less than 40. Because they believe if you work less than 40, then you live at the expense of the society. So you have to work more. They don't limit you how much, but more than 40. And in France, it's less than 35. Otherwise, they penalize you. They think you're whatever. I don't know what they think. So next is the pretty weak connection between universities and the business. Again, I already mentioned how impressed I was, how U.S. universities really involve business, and they are school of thought. All the major business conferences are organized by universities, by university students. They have special groups, like, for example, again, have to highlight the Harvard model, where they organize groups around each specific technology. So there is a group about mobile applications. It's like maybe like 15, 20 people from the whole school, but they are specifically know anything and everything about those mobile apps, like much better than anybody I've met in the industry. And again, they invite people, they discuss with them, they visit regularly different countries, they go to China if necessary, etc. But we are inside the business. And again, guess if I need to hire somebody 5 years from now, I'm very impressed with Harvard kids, and I will definitely hire them because they know everything about this industry. Unlike some detached European theoretical PhDs that can solve a lot of math equations, but cannot really put them into the business. And again, there is a final, I think I already touched a little bit, is there is this practice in Europe of actually giving money to companies for something. I don't know about Latvia and Lithuania, they say 70% of IT business is built around acquiring European money. I don't know if you have that practice in Latvia, but there is European money available for this, for that, like for culture, history, IT funding, startups, etc. So there are consultancy agencies being built around those sources, and there are companies, like whole companies, that do nothing else but identify what kind of funding is available, and they build the product specifically to match that funding, and they do the whole thing just to get the money. So it doesn't make any sense. Like, they don't build a product for the consumer that would allow Lithuanians to compete successfully globally, but they just built the company to acquire the money. I think that's wrong. But again, that's my personal opinion. So I don't believe that those practices where governments in Europe just say, hey, this is cash, and we're behind Silicon Valley, so let's just give cash to companies, that solves it. I don't think it's working. But still, much more often than not, this is the case. And again, these are the areas to highlight. Again, it's probably beyond my presentation to go deeply into action points, like what we have to do. What probably I would call is just some attention to the document called the Manifesto. I don't know, anybody here heard of that? No hands. So, okay, I think this is very telling, but this is the document produced by the top European entrepreneurs, including the founder of Skype, including the Angry Bird guys, including myself, that actually analyzes pretty deeply like the specifically entrepreneurship education problems in Europe, and comes up with very specific action points. What we, the entrepreneurs, believe needs to happen, what governments and other institutions need to do to have the best possible ROI on the effort, to prepare Europe for innovation, to really make it a nice, neat, cool place for building companies like Skype and many more. And just to give you some brief preview, these are the specific areas that are discussed in details: the education skills, the access to talent, access to capital, regulations, and thought leadership. So again, we believe this is important. If somebody can listen to that, make any conclusions, do any actions, that would be more than enough for that specific speech. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Paldies.
Sorry, if you give me 1 second, please. Sorry, last but not very least, there is one interesting, cool surprise project that I did with Jumava, and I want to invite Juris of Jumava to make an interesting announcement, please.
Nu jā, tad arī jūsu izdalītos materiālos ir tas pārsteigums, ko mēs esam sagatavojuši, ir izdota Iļja Laura grāmata, un man tas bija pavisam tā, kā saka, nejauši. Es biju Lietuvā tajā brīdī, kad iznāca viņa grāmata, satika izdevēju, un jāsaka, tie lielie panākumi Lietuvā man uzrunāja, un vēl man uzrunāja tas, ka faktiski viņa bizness, kas ir aplikācijas biznesa 10 miljoniem, tur lādējumi un tā tālāk, viņiem tomēr ir vajadzīga vēl grāmata, lai savas idejas nestu tautā un nestu. Un jāsaka, Latvijā faktiski iznāk ļoti maz biznesām veltīt grāmatu, tur faktiski nav pieprasījums, un tas ir sācies tā, ka pēc 8. gada, pēc krīzes, tas arvien mazāk, un liekas, tāpēc ir tas tās nozīmīgs notikums. Un mēs esam operā, mums diemžēl neļauj tirgot te grāmatas, un tā ir tāda Latvijas droši vien tāda specifika. Bet jūsu mapītēs ir tāds tā kā, parakstīšanās, un ja atdosiet man vai mūsu Marutai, tad mēs to nesīsim tālāk. Un man likās, kas bija Iļja Lauras runa bija ļoti laba un jauka, kas arī nebija formāli, bija tieši par to, kas biznesa ir. Un faktiski mums Iļja Lauras ir iespēja uzdāvināt, un pirmā grāmata nāk uz Lijā. Ozolkungs lūdzu skatuves saņem grāmatu no viena no bagātākām Lietuvas cilvēkiem.
Again, sorry, I did not understand anything of what you said.
Very nice.
He said you give me a present, this great book.
Oh.
Thank you.
Cool, here it is.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I really wanted to thank Jumava for this non-commercial project, which was proven to be very successful in Lithuania in the last year. That book did all the records of publishing records in Lithuania, and we decided to publish that book in Latvia. We think that knowledge is very relevant. Again, this is a non-commercial. I'm getting zero royalties from that, so don't please think that I'm just trying to sell you something. But I really think that those things are important, and unless we really learn how to do things differently, we can't really make forward progress. So thank you again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Grāmatu izdevusi izdevniecība Jumava.